before we start the video, yes, I know my hair looks bad. I'm working on it. I'm getting a haircut as this is being uploaded. So yes, this will be the last video with slightly longer than normal hair crispy. But we're not here to talk about my hair. We are here to talk about house rules. House rules in D&D have been trending for a little bit now, and I wanted to weigh in a little bit by looking at some of the worst house rules on Reddit. Classic Crispy's Tavern fashion, we'll be looking at the best of the worst and seeing what we can learn from them to make our own games better. So without further ado, guys, let's get started. Alright, first up we have, I hate when DMs arbitrarily ban core features of the game just because they had that one bad experience with them in the past. My last campaign was called Hunting the Desert Orcs, and one of my players rolled up a Hunter Ranger with orcs as a favorite enemy and desert as a favorite terrain. Hence, I've banned rangers from all my games. The biggest thing here is applying very specific situations to every single one of your games. That is not a good thing. This is a very specific situation that I don't even really think is a problem. A ranger being good at tracking things and being good in certain environments is like a ranger's whole thing, and banning them because they did that is ridiculous. It's like banning rogue for lockpicking or banning a fighter for hitting a person. It's what they're good at. But the point is, the DM didn't just ban the ranger for this specific campaign, which maybe I would get if it would get really, really overpowered, and that's a big frickin' maybe. But not only that, but they banned them in every single one of their campaigns. Look, I get it. When you have a negative experience, you kind of start to generalize every experience into that negative experience. I've done that too. But, especially in D&D, don't be so draconian about it. Banning rangers in every single campaign because of that experience is just not going to look really well in your DMing. First impressions are a big deal. And while a lot of people think their first impression is in session 1, that's not really the case. First impressions start immediately upon just talking to you. And if the first impression of you is you banning a class for a reason that a lot of people are going to see as arbitrary, yeah, that's a problem. Maybe run through the house rules with your players, see how they react to it, and then decide after that how you're going to use them in the campaign. That's what I do. I give my players my patch notes now so that they can understand what kind of game I run. You can learn a lot about a game just based on the house rules, though you should still absolutely just, explain your game to them in general too. They're both really important. This is a DM who's doing something really extreme for something really simple, and it's just not a good look. Apparently, polymorphing into a red dragon means the DM can make you turn against the party with no prior warning, even though you're fighting a literal god that wants to annihilate you all, because red dragons are covetous. This is the exact kind of DM outsmarts the players situation that gets really trendy on the internet, but when you actually think about it for 2 seconds, you realize, man, that would really piss me off if that was actually in the game. Yes, red dragons are evil creatures, but first and foremost, by the rules of polymorph, that's literally not how it works. Creatures with polymorph retain their intellectual stats, so yeah, that shouldn't happen. They should also retain their alignment too, so that really, really shouldn't happen. The point is that the DM did something really stupid as a gotcha move against the players. Now, in this particular case, this was not with the rules, but a lot of the time, the DM and sometimes the players will try to exploit technicalities to make a gotcha on the players. And while in some games that might be fun, in the vast majority of games, it's gonna get annoying if you do it too much. Especially when you're bending the rules or just straight up breaking them to make it happen. Sure, it might get you some karma on Reddit if you tell everyone that you killed your entire party by turning one of them into a red dragon and then making him evil by breaking the rules of the polymorph spell. But still, it's just gonna be really, really dumb, and it's gonna piss your players off. Clearly. If you're going to house rule something, you shouldn't do it while you're playing the game. I very rarely make decisions in the middle of the game that will have major implications like this. I mean, seriously, polymorph changing your alignment would have implications for anyone who uses the spell in the future. I try my best to make sure that every single house rule is made between sessions. I'll tell my players, hey, that might change in the future, but I will never change it in the present unless it's super, super urgent. Because you don't want to feel like you're getting specifically targeted, because this is definitely what I'd call targeting. It just is cheesy. It's not clever, it's not cool, it just sucks. One game I played, and the only game I've played on the GM, had a house rule where you needed to keep track of natural bodily functions at all times. Go a few days without taking a piss, your bladder is so full that affects everything you do. You might even piss yourself and get negative modifiers to charisma because of the smell until you wash yourself. Well, when I was first starting out my D&D campaign, this is a funny little coincidence, my friend Caden was worried about this specific thing. He actually asked me, so, like, Crispy, do we have to keep track of every single time we take a piss or something? And I was like, no, what, are you kidding me? That does not sound fun at all. I guess this GM disagreed with me because they added this into their campaign for basically no reason. Look, I get it. Realism could be interesting. For a lot of campaigns, realism is a big element, but there are certain elements of realism that are just really, really unfun. We read a recent horror story about a guy who added keeping track of the menstrual cycle as a mechanic for his own character, and it was definitely not just a little weird, but it was also largely unnecessary and a hindrance for the rest of the party. This just gets annoying. Sometimes realism is meant to make the game more challenging, but remember, challenging and just straight up frustrating are not supposed to be the same thing. When I'm playing Cuphead, sure, I get annoyed sometimes, but it's not because I feel like the game is cheating. I feel like it's because I'm doing badly and I need to improve. That's the kind of thing that challenge should do. But here, it just feels bad. It just feels like, oh, I've got to keep track of all these other things on top of the things that I already keep track of in a TTRPG. It just distracts from a lot of the things that make this game special. Keeping track of all these bodily function numbers might be fun for some games, but a lot of people come to D&D for the roleplay, for the flavor, to play with their friends and to create an awesome story. This just gets in the way. Never had this on my table, but I've heard of this DM at a friend's party that had this house rule that if you rolled 3 nat 1s in a row, you insta-died. So this rule is kind of silly, but actually, it is kind of a rule I use. I stress, kind of. If you've watched any of my actual plays, you know that I use confirmed nat 1s or confirmed nat 20s. I've been told that's not what they're actually called, but that's what I call them, so we're gonna go with it. Basically, it's a rule that if you roll a nat 20, you roll again. If you get 2 nat 20s in a row, something miraculous happens. If you roll 2 nat 1s in a row, though, something horrible happens. It's just a two-sided coin of extra luck that increases the chances for something insane to happen at the table. And it's been really fun in my latest campaign that you'll be seeing soon in a few weeks. But anyway, look, point is that yes, adding some more flair to nat 1s, nat 20s can be interesting, but insta-character death it just never feels good, to say the least. Character death should feel like something that the player earned. Maybe not earned in a good way necessarily, but something that at the very least they could have seen coming, like facing an enemy that was unbeatable, or jumping off a cliff and turning into a goldfish. These are the kind of things that players might do that makes them go, oh, crap. Really shouldn't have done that. In this case, what did the player do wrong? They rolled dice and they didn't get really lucky. I mean, I remember in Critical Role, Ford from the second campaign, the Mighty Nine, he was throwing sandbags, and I think he rolled 3 nat 1s in a row. If this rule was implemented, I guess he would just drop one of those sandbags in his face and die instantly from the embarrassment or something. And while that might be a memeable moment at the time, it would definitely be frustrating at any game table that puts a lot of stock into their characters. You gotta remember to respect the love people put into these characters. Maybe this rule will be fun in a more casual campaign, but even there, it just feels like a cheap way to introduce more character death without putting any more stakes in front of you. You only get XP based on kill count. Getting past level 1 as a rogue was painful. Oh god, this is the kind of rule that really, really annoys me. Now, I actually am most experienced with this in video games, because I don't play D&D a lot. I'm mostly a dungeon master. But in the video game Destiny, there are these things called bounties. And for these bounties, you need to accomplish certain objectives. Kill enemies with precision hits, or do damage with void weapons as your elemental attack. You know, those are the kind of things you put into a bounty. However, you are playing with teammates. A lot of the time you're playing with a fire team, and that can lead to people kind of competing with each other for kills, hogging doors so no one else gets the kills against the enemy so they can complete their bounties faster. It creates this competitive element in a game that is supposed to be cooperative, and that really sucks. Here, I see the exact same thing, but for D&D, which is even more dumb because a lot of the time you're playing with people at a physical table. At least in Destiny, I can't see the idiot who's hogging all the kills and stopping me from completing my damn Vanguard bounties that week. Sorry. Anyway, what was I talking about? Right, Dungeons and Dragons. So in D&D, you're supposed to be working together. At least in the vast majority of games, you're supposed to be working together. Creating a level up system like this forces players to work kind of against each other in terms of getting kills. Sure, it could create a neat little micromanaging game where players like save enemies so that the underlevel players can get the hit on them, but still, this just sucks. XP, if you're gonna use it, is supposed to be split among the entire party for a reason, so the players feel like they're leveling up, you know, together. Here we just see players that are gonna be forced to compete with each other for the level ups, and for certain characters, this will basically make leveling up impossible. I mean, can you imagine playing a healer cleric in this kind of game? I mean, damn, I feel bad for the rogue, but for a cleric, this would make the game basically impossible. Don't do stuff like this. If you're gonna use XP, at least use it right. I once played in a game that had permanent injury tables whenever you were crit. In the first session, my character was clawed in the intestine or something like that, and I had to spend the remainder of the quest with a colostomy bag. I really hope I pronounced that last thing right, but look, I get it. Campaigns that have more challenging combats can be really interesting, but permanent injuries like this can be also really hindering for the players. Like I said before, there's a fine line between frustrating and challenging. Where that line is really hard to find because it depends on the players and depends on how you, the DM, want to run the game. It is hard to walk the line between frustrating and challenging. In my opinion, this crosses that line the big way. Sure, permanent injury tables or just injury tables could be interesting. There are times where I think a player character getting a broken arm on a crit, forcing them to roll a disadvantage on certain attacks, that might be interesting. However, if it happens too much, it will get cumbersome really quickly. 5e was not built with those mechanics in mind, and you have to be smart with what you're pulling off the internet and putting into your game. Putting critical fumble tables with major consequences for the players basically just having bad luck would really suck, especially for a longer campaign. I mean, could you imagine if that colostomy thing was a thing throughout the entire game? Yeah, that would be extremely cumbersome to say the least, especially in a world with magic. Just from a point of view of world building, it just doesn't make much sense in the vast majority of games where D&D traditionally I stress, is a high magic setting where I feel like this kind of thing could be solved with a decent cleric. A friend of mine didn't like the rules for multiclassing in 5e. As the DM, he ruled that characters who multiclass would gain levels in each class simultaneously, but you were limited to 2 classes. Needless to say, the power scale was immediately broken. Yeah, so this is the kind of rule that a new DM might make and think to themselves, yeah, this makes sense, that's clever. You know how I know? Because I was a new DM who did that myself. I added house rules into my game that made sense to me at the time, but like as I kept on playing and DMing, I realized, no, these don't make sense. What the hell was I thinking? What was I doing? And yeah, now here we are, somebody with a lot of regrets. Don't be like me. But look, point is, D&D is built with multi-classing mechanics in mind, and they don't change them for a reason. Introducing mechanics like this can create a serious problem of OP player characters. Now, are OP player characters always a problem? No, but for a lot of DMs, OP player characters can become a serious issue, especially if you don't want to go out of your way to balance around them. Especially when there's only one OP character with the rest being relatively normal on the power scale. It can create a balancing nightmare for the DMs, and I know people crawl up my ass every time I bring up the word balance in a Dungeons & Dragons video to say I'm a killjoy or whatever, and you're allowed to have that opinion, obviously. But in a game like mine, a game where combat is a big deal, something like this just sounds like a recipe for disaster. Combat is a big draw of my game, and if the combat is a crapshoot, it's gonna suck. And if I have to spend any more hours adjusting and tweaking mechanics just because I have one overpowered player character, yeah, that's gonna get really annoying really fast. At that point, just get rid of the dumb multi-class house rule. It doesn't make sense to begin with. The game is built with these certain multi-class mechanics in mind for a reason. The designers knew what they were doing when they did it. You don't need to change fundamental mechanics like this. You know that range that was given to all ranged weapons? Well, my old DM house ruled it so that you have to be at the exact distance of the first number. Don't do that. If you give a potion to someone unconscious, you have to roll to see if they choke on it. This will be the last one for a reason. Because I saw some responses to this saying, I don't understand why DMs would make it so that players can die easier. Now, I will say, in my games, there are a couple rules that make it so that players will face more consequences for hitting 0 hit points in combat. I've recently adjusted my patch notes to include the rule where if you get knocked unconscious and brought back, you now suffer a point of exhaustion. Don't worry, all my players out there, this ruling will not take effect in your current campaigns. This is for the next patch of my games. Don't worry. But anyway, we'll get back to that, my players, in a few months. But back to what we were saying. What I'm talking about here is, look, there are some games where player character death is going to be more of a big deal. In 5e, player characters are really, really powerful sometimes. With the right setup, player characters can avoid the consequences of hitting 0 hit points really, really easy. And it can make the game kind of seem frivolous in combat. So I do get it when DMs introduce more consequences to hitting 0 hit points. But something like this is, like we said multiple times in this video, needlessly annoying. Look, potions, they cost money. The players invest in them, and on top of that, at least in my games, and I'm pretty sure rules is written, they take an action to give to someone else. So you're investing both money and action into doing this. It should be rewarded with a stabilization at the very least. Having the player have a chance to choke on it, yeah, that just sucks, because it adds more randomization to something that the players set up. And yeah, randomization is part of tabletop role-playing games, but the players should be rewarded for investing in some kind of safety net like a healing potion. Because if you add like a 50-50 shot for them to choke on the potion, it just is going to discourage them from doing smart things like stocking up on potions before a fight. Encourage your players to prepare, to strategize, to plan. Don't punish them for it. Give them some kind of reward so that they keep on doing it. That kind of care should be something that you pay attention to and that you reward as a dungeon master. Alright, what did we learn here? Well, the biggest takeaway for me is figuring out what is challenging and what is frustrating. What's a good rule of thumb? The best rule of thumb is to ask your players about it. Because again, it's subjective. It's based on their perception of challenging. And if they find it challenging, then that's good. But if they find it frustrating and annoying, that's bad. Asking them the question is important. Asking them what they think about these house rules is important, especially if you're trying to make the game harder. The other big thing, start with small adjustments. Slicing out big chunks can be dangerous in a game, especially like Dungeons & Dragons, where a lot of those big chunks matter to the overall ecosystem of the game. If you're going to ban things like classes or races, tell the players up front. In fact, for all house rules, tell your players up front. It's only recently that I wrote up my patch notes document for my players to read, and that's something I definitely regret. I was just telling them at session 0, but what, was I expecting them to memorize my house rules? That was stupid. I should have always had these things written down, and I recommend that you do too. If you're going to do house rules, make sure there's somewhere where your players can read them. But yeah, there you go. One of these days, we'll go over my patch notes and my house rules in my games, but that day is not today, unfortunately. Frankly, I'm a little bit scared of doing that video, especially after reading this thread. But hey, if you want that video, make sure to let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll do it in the future. But in any case, if you guys enjoyed, then please do hit the like button. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our RPG horror story series, where we cover the best and the worst of Dungeons & Dragons. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories, thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment house rule. Let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.